Week 2 of Code Lyoko month. Let's see what's on the docket this time. With the premise revolving around fighting an evil computer program in a virtual world, Code Lyoko was a show that lent itself well to video games. Apparently, a publisher known as the Game Factory felt the same way, as they published 3 Code Lyoko games as the show was airing its final season. Quest for Infinity was a decent 3D action game, and Fall of Xana was a mediocre RPG, but today we're gonna focus on the first game released on the Nintendo DS, simply titled Code Lyoko. This was my favorite of the 3, hands down. I actually still have my copy of the game that I bought as a kid, and despite its age, the experience still holds up for the most part. So let's go over this old gem, and while we're at it, let's go ahead and make this a sketchy impressions video for a game I played over 10 years ago. Don't question it. Since the game has the exact same name as the show, I'll be referring to the show as Code Lyoko, while the game will be referred to as CL. This way, I can minimize confusion as much as possible. With that being said, CL's story is a modest 15 chapters long, and beating it will take around 7 hours if you know what you're doing. While the game was released during Season 4's airing, the story only covers the first 2 seasons. In spite of that, however, the game doesn't feel incomplete, since the ending of Season 2 is somewhat conclusive. Each chapter is a direct adaptation of various episodes from Seasons 1 and 2, except the final chapter, which is a loose adaptation of the Season 3 premiere. Of course, some minor additions are made to add to the game's playtime, but the level of accuracy when it comes to CL's story is almost scary. It even pulls clips directly from the show to use as cutscenes, and many dialogue sequences follow the source material almost word for word.
Right. Would someone please say something funny before I have a heart attack?
My father sacrificed himself for me, and we don't even know if he's still on Lyoko.
Fine. Excuse me while I have my heart attack.
All those memories of your life on Earth, that was the fragment that Xana took from you to bind you to him, and Franz Hopper managed to give them back to you.
It really feels like you're taking the series with you on the go, and considering that the game came out in 2007 when smartphones were only just coming out and streaming cartoons online wasn't as easy as it is now, that meant a lot. Much like how Code Lyoko blended 2 different animation styles, CL blended 2 different styles of gameplay. Each chapter has a real-world level and a Lyoko level. The real-world segments play out like a point-and-click adventure game as you complete various tasks around Kadak Academy and its surrounding areas. The Lyoko levels play out like a 3D action game, where the objective is pretty simple: reach the end of the level and kill any monsters that try to stop you. Each playable character has a different playstyle. Ulrich is close range, Yumi is mid range, Odd is long range, and Aelita is completely useless. Remember, this game is based on the first 2 seasons. Since Aelita is only good for deactivating towers in this game, it's best to only switch to her when you're at the very last checkpoint before a tower, because if you end up having to fight monsters with her, you're gonna have a bad time. Each character has a special power that's unique to them. Odd can climb up walls, Ulrich can dash across platforms with super sprint, Yumi can move objects with her telekinesis, and Aelita can levitate across gaps, with her only offensive move being an energy blast that does crap damage and consumes your power points like crazy. I can't stress this enough, people. Don't use Aelita. As a kid, I preferred the Lyoko levels and found the real world ones to be boring, but these days, I feel the exact opposite. Upon playing this game again, the Lyoko levels are rather bare bones. You're simply going from point A to point B, occasionally being stopped by monsters that you have to defeat in order to progress. Only 2 of the 4 available characters are worth using, since Aelita can't reliably defend herself and Ulrich's close-range combat style isn't that useful in a game where every single monster has a long-range laser attack. While the game does try to mix things up a bit with vehicle segments, minor puzzle solving, and boss battles with the Schifozoa, Clone Ulrich, and a final boss that's exclusive to the game, these moments are so few and far between that it makes the Lyoko levels rather monotonous. By contrast, the real-world levels are much more fun. Because you could semi-freely explore the world, there was often more than one way to get to where you needed to go. It was fun being able to actually interact with the various teachers and students, and because these segments were more story-heavy, I felt a lot more involved than I did in the 3D levels. Thankfully, because the game is so short, these levels don't get so repetitive that they overstay their welcome. It goes without saying, the 2D sections of CL aged way better visually than the 3D sections. I mean, this is a game that came out on the DS, whose 3D graphics were meant to be comparable to the N64. Thankfully, since most of the environments and monsters in Code Lyoko aren't all that complicated, they look alright, especially for a DS game made on a small budget. The 2D levels, however, look great. The backgrounds are pulled straight from the show, and the character models are spot on. Because this wasn't a TV show where you could just cut to the next scene to change locations, the dev team had to map out where all the different areas of the school were in relation to one another. And a lot of the fun in these levels comes from exploring the different areas to see where everything is. As for how the game sounds, the entire soundtrack consists of recreations of the music from the show, since the DS's audio processor couldn't handle the actual soundtrack. And at a time where you couldn't easily find the Code Lyoko soundtrack online, this was the next best thing. It's clear that the goal of CL was to recreate the show as closely as possible, to translate the enjoyment of watching the show into video game form, and considering the hardware that they were working with, I'd say they succeeded. As opposed to the later games where all the time is spent on the Lyoko sections, CL didn't neglect how important the real world was to the series. It gave both aspects of the show equal attention and prioritized the storytelling, and because of that, it's a stronger experience overall in spite of its short playtime. If you're a fan of the show and want to experience it in a new and interesting way, I'd say give this game a shot. You can get a used copy for relatively cheap, and if you have a DS emulator on your computer or smartphone, then that's even better. Next week, we'll be talking about the writing of Code Lyoko, specifically how its mostly episodic format worked in its favor. So what did you think of the Code Lyoko game? Swarm that comment section below or bug me on social media. Until next time, keep it sketchy, folks.